Look, if you've got a scab on your arm that won't heal, sure, you could just say, I think I'll just put a $2 bandage on that and pretend it's not there. Cheap fix. You open that up and it's still there and it's still there. $2 bandage, $2 bandage. It never goes away. Ultimately, you have to address the problem before you start healing. That's what I'm optimistic about this year. I'm optimistic that I think our government will start the healing process by addressing their problems. And if they don't, everything I'm saying here is off completely. And I have a good scenario and a bad scenario, so I'll give you a roadmap, if you will, to see which of these scenarios is going to unfold. I think it's highly possible that these people that went to Washington with the idea of cutting government and limited government and living within our means and all that, I have a feeling it's very possible they could change their mind. See, austerity is not all that fun. The UK is ahead of us. Britain is leading us in this. They have gotten right. Their federal government is getting right-sized right now, and they cut their defense budget by 8%. Now, what does that mean at a more realistic level, at a lower level? What that means is they had an order for 138 joint strike fighters, and I think some of that stuff is made right here in Texas, and it's made and engineered all over this country, and they cut their orders from 138 to 40. Okay, we can go with this. I'll be here. I want to summarize this issue. This is my view of what our federal government is. That piñata there is the world's largest piñata. It was built for that reason, to be in Guinness World Records. And all those people around there are the voters of America and the politicians that represent them. And the philosophy of our federal government is, if you promise the voters more candy, they'll reelect you. Don't worry that you have no way to pay for it. That's what you do. You hire your senator and your congressman or woman to go to Washington and bang on the piñata and steal as much candy as possible and bring it back to Dallas. Just like yesterday in Memphis, same thing. They elect their politicians to go to Washington, bang the piñata, bring home the candy. I hear it from my guy. Hey, I just get to Washington, got a $40 million contract for College Station for the university, and reelect me, and bang, I can go get some more of that. You see, that's all your government is. That's all your Senate and your House of Representatives are people that you send and I send, and the people from Memphis and San Francisco send to Washington to bang the piñata and steal as much candy as possible. Not one of those people is sent there to look out for the future of our country. None of them. Who's looking out for that? Who's going to be responsible for this? See, your kids, you're not paying for anything. You're not paying enough. I'm not either. Our government's spending too much money. One of the things that's going to happen is either we're going to raise taxes a lot or our government is going to downsize. We'll find out how that debate lines out. But one of those two things is going to happen because we are indebting our children and our grandchildren beyond your imagination. Now, you see, I always say that I had 2 kids in private college I paid through and paid for 2 weddings. So, frankly, I don't care if my kids pay for all of this, all right? And that used to be kind of funny when it was only $1 trillion. But now that it's not hardly even funny anymore, all right? Now, here's the example. See, some of you are all worried about $14 trillion in U.S. debt. Oh, my gosh, they've doubled the debt. How are we ever going to pay for that? Well, that's nothing. That's pocket change. 14 trillion is pocket change. Number one, that doesn't include Fannie and Freddie, and that also doesn't include what we'll be spending this year or next year in Iraq and in Afghanistan and wherever else we put troops and throw away money. All these things are good. Don't get me wrong. I might have hit your pet project. If I haven't yet, if you're the big polar bear fan in the room, fine. That's a good project too. But it costs money to keep polar bears on ice caps up there, or any other project. But you see, the thing is, we can't pay for it. Forget the 14 trillion. The unfunded liability for Social Security and Medicare is $43 trillion, and that's right out of their report. I can't dance. I got personality defects. I can't keep time and rhythm. But I can read 200-page documents from boards of directors, and I read through that report until I found that number, 43 trillion. What that means is, for me to pay you your Social Security and the Medicare that you think you're supposed to get, I got to come up with $43 trillion somewhere. That's why the Congressional Budget Office 2 years ago told me and about 300 other economists in Washington, D.C. in March, a little bit of truth from Washington, when he looked us right in the eye and said, your government cannot honor its social contract. That's the accountant. The politicians won't tell you that. The politicians will tell you that that health care bill they passed pays for itself. Ask them about that one. Ask your doctor about that, because the whole premise, they looked me right in the eye and you right in the eye and said, this health care bill will pay for itself. The whole thing was premised on the doctor's haircut. Ask your doctor, next time you go to the doctor, ask your doctor how that doctor's haircut's going to work out. Do that after they've drawn blood, by the way. It's premised on them getting a 25% reduction in their compensation for Medicare. I asked my doctor about that, and he said, I'm not worried about that because they've been threatening to do that to us for 5 years, and they never do. And sure enough, after they passed that health care and told you it's going to pay for itself, within 60 days, little footnote way back on page 6B, the Wall Street Journal, Congress votes to take a pass again on the doctor's haircut. So they never had any intention of doing that. They just look you right in the eye and lie to you. That's all there is to it. And everybody knows this. See, it's not really lying, because I always think back about Alan Greenspan when he was chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he was speaking before Congress. This would have been about 10 years ago. And somebody asked him a question, said, Dr. Greenspan, if I understand you correctly, blah, blah, blah. And Greenspan goes, Congressman, if you think you understood what I just said, I must have misspoken. All right? So that's what I'm saying, lying is just shorthand for subterfuge, obfuscation, misleading, whatever you want to call it. This is what the piñata looks like when the candy's gone. This is where we are right now. And here are what the voters look like when the piñata is broken. That little girl says, all I wanted to do was play Viva Piñata. See that? We're going to find out this year what Americans are made out of. How are you going to respond? See? Let's see, what do I got next here? Yeah. Here come the adults. I've seen truth out of Washington, D.C. twice now in my lifetime. The first time was in 1980 actually. Jimmy Carter, before he was elected, hired Paul Volcker to come in and tame inflation. And he lost any hope of getting reelected. You don't get reelected president when you raise interest rates to 18%. Paul Volcker came in and told everybody, I'm going to tame inflation. There won't be inflation. And you go, yeah, right, dude. You prove it. Let's see. Words are good. You prove it. Well, he stepped up and proved it. Mortgage rates went to 18%. And for 3 years, we had a rough time. He had to wear a bulletproof vest. Home builders were sending in chopped up 2x4s. Farmers were parking tractors in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's the kind of issue, that's what it takes to get the country right. 3 years of challenge, and then we had 20 years of prosperity. I haven't seen anything close to that since then until I saw these guys. It's not Homer Simpson, it's Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles, a Republican and a Democrat. And I could care less if you're a Republican or Democrat. I was born a Republican in Kansas, but I changed parties 2 years ago. I'm a registered cynic now. I don't believe any of them. And I don't care if you do either. This isn't a political issue. This is a government country issue. Forget Republican or Democrat. The worst thing that can happen in my mind would be as if the Republicans decide it's more important that Barack Obama does not get elected and see to it that the economy doesn't recover so he doesn't get reelected. That, if you're in a business, that will be the worst news you will see, because this can change. These guys came out and told the truth. If you haven't seen what they wrote, it's easy to read because truth is quite simple. Bullet list. Cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut the marginal income tax rate to something like 24%. Get rid of all the loopholes and get rid of all the tax benefits. Now, those guys are telling you the truth. You may not like it, but you might as well look at it because that's what needs to be done to avoid gold going to $2,000 an ounce and people continuing to hide their money. Now, I got real optimistic about that. I saw a specter of truth out of Washington for the first time in like 30 years. And I was really on an adrenaline rush of optimism right at that point. And then about a week later, there's a survey out. 70% of Americans don't want any of that cut. And 70% of the Republicans said they don't want any of that cut. So there you go. We're going to find out in 2011, whether you're Republican or Democrat, if you're in the bang the piñata category and all you want to do is play Viva Piñata or not. Sure, we can print $1 trillion a year and keep pretending that this is working and keep adding $1 trillion every 6 months or whatever to our debt. And our kids will wake up 10 years from now and they'll have this enormous debt to pay back and they won't be able to do anything cool other than work and pay taxes to pay off our debt. I don't think they will view us as the greatest generation. I'll be interested to see what kind of description they have for our generation of people that were unwilling to pay their own way. I hope I'm wrong. I'm optimistic that we're better than that. That's where my optimism comes from. I'm convinced that you're better than that, and I'm convinced that we are all better than that. And if your government would just tell you the truth, you'd step up and do something about it. You would pay something, you would do your part, but your government keeps lying to you and saying they can pay for this stuff and they can't. Probably the best thing that would happen would be is if the bond market completely froze up and interest rates on treasuries went from 3.5 to 10 because nobody will buy that worthless paper anymore. That's how you get real. As long as they don't, they can keep pretending to you and telling you stuff. Let me just give you an example of this because some of you might be thinking I'm making this up. Here's an example in New Jersey. The stock market goes up really big in 1999. So the politicians there go, hey, look here, our pension fund went up enough. Let's don't make a contribution this year. So they didn't. They punted on their contribution that year. And not only that, hey, let's give them some more stuff. And so not only do they not make a contribution to your pension, then they increase your benefits. And they think you're neat. They really admire you. Well, now their pension's completely broken. See, that's the kind of stuff, that's just one example of how politics works. And people are waking up to this. But the problem is, the little man or woman on the street, like me, working for a living for the most part, they don't have a clue of what's going on with this. They don't have a clue about that pension guy saying, it's a tragedy, the public pension's here. That means a teacher in your neighborhood. That means a cop in your neighborhood. They don't have a clue of what's going on here. This is what's going to happen in 2011. Either we're going to get real and tell people the truth and do something about it, or we'll print another trillion and hope the tooth fairy comes next summer and gets us all out of this.